Okay, we on air? Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the Board Policy Committee meeting for January 16th, 2018. Lynn, has the meeting been properly posted?
Yes, it has been.
Thank you. No citizens have shown up to address us, so we'll move through that. We do have a number of action items this evening and a review of the stuff from the first meeting, the first reading at the board meeting last week. So we'll move right into it. Action items. Approval of the policy minutes from our December meeting. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Barbara,
I'll second.
seconded by Greg. Any discussion on the minutes? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Aye. 4-0. I should have mentioned that Amanda is excused this evening. Thank you. We have 8 policies to address and discuss for revisions. I think they're all revisions. We're going to have to... Oh, they're just moving some chairs around. Okay. We're going to have to review these for revision. That's a mouthful. And most of these are coming to us as recommendations from Neola. So the first one in the group is policy 3120.01 about job descriptions. The language here was to clarify that certain job descriptions, those of licensed personnel, are to be approved by the board. And you will see that as a single sentence added to the first paragraph. And a deletion of a line near the end, which really is no longer relevant.
Correct.
Questions? If there's no further questions, I will, why don't I just make the motions, going right down the list. I will move for approval of the policy revisions for 3120.01, job descriptions. Is there a second? Seconded by Greg. Any further questions on this one? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
4-0, Lynn. That will go to a first reading on February 14th. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. The next one, it's covering 2 different policies, one for professional staff, one for support staff. 3122.01 and 4122.01. The wording is the same, it's just for 2 different groups of employees. This one changes the language of illegal drugs to alcohol and other drug abuse. Also adds a relatively lengthy statement relative to the use of professional staff prescription drugs, those professional staff that are on some kind of prescription medication, so that they can take them on the job, even though that might be considered in some situations the wrong drugs. It's describing that sometimes that has to be the case.
Just generally thinking this is, think of your painkillers, your opioid-based painkillers. As long as they're being taken in accordance with the prescription, it's okay. If they're being abused, taken beyond, then that's when it becomes that's why they changed the language from illegal drug to other drug abuse.
Any questions on this one? It does just, makes it clear that we would not have to discipline in those situations. So I'm going to move for approval of 3122.01 and 4122.01 as revised. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Como. Any further questions on these 2 revisions?
I just
Joe?
one little tweak.
Please.
Where it says reasonable suspicion testing as a header, which is at the end of the second paragraph.
Yes?
Just, we need an extra return in there before that, that's all.
Oh, drop it down a bit?
Yeah. Just a little cleanup. Nothing substantive there, so.
Good point. Okay, we've had a motion and a second. No further questions. All in favor, please say aye.
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 4-0, Lynn. Okay. Policy 5310.01, emergency nursing services. The point being here that emergency nursing policies are to be in place for all of our activities at the schools and activities out of the school. And I guess the point that I finally reread this again, that the nursing, a nurse has to be the one that is actually putting these policies together, Joe.
Correct.
Are we following that part of this policy?
Absolutely. The nursing team met with us, I want to say a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, as we reviewed these policies. So we took what was provided to us by Neola, what the board had approved last February. Nurses looked at that and essentially approved, using their professional lens, the language that was proposed to us. And that's the language that you have in front of you today. And again, this keeps us in compliance with what the DPI expects us to do around school nursing.
Barbara?
Yes, you mentioned nursing team.
Yep.
And my question was, does the district have a nurse? Well, if we have a nursing team, we must have a registered nurse as part of, how many people are on this
We
team?
have 3 registered nurses working in our
Okay.
district.
Do any of them, do they have any offices in the district, or are they on call?
They are stationed out of the Lindholm building. That would be where their office is. I would say they spend 95% of their time in schools on a rotating schedule to address the needs of the kids that we have in the district.
So they go to schools even though there might not be a situation that needs a nurse?
There may not be an emergency that requires a
Yes,
nurse. There
yes.
may be students who have certain health needs that they're checking in on a daily basis.
Okay, so if a school has a need for a nurse, how do you contact them?
They all have cell phones.
Okay.
And the school office contacts them via cell phone.
Okay.
All of our schools do have health room clerical staff that the nurses have trained in certain areas, and they call that delegating. So the nurses
Yes.
have delegated responsibilities of our health room staff
Yes.
to provide cares for students.
All right, then it says on the last sentence, may I go on, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, the nurse shall review and evaluate emergency nursing services each year, including a review of the policies referenced above, and shall report to the board regarding such services and bring proposed revisions, et cetera. I don't recall a report.
Oh,
So
yes.
Yep. Yeah, for
would you
We have an annual
remind me?
report.
Would you remind me of that, please?
There have been annual reports. We haven't done it in the formal board setting. We've provided it in the
It's
form
right.
of one of our weekly board updates.
Okay.
Information has been provided to the board. I have been the liaison from the nurses to
Mm-hmm.
the board around policy updates and school nursing as appropriate.
Okay, well, I do recall, getting reports in writing, but I wondered if we had to do it
There was a
verbally.
point in time where there had been a very lengthy report that was pared down substantially by my predecessor, and that's the report that we have
Okay.
provided.
All right,
But I thought there was something that we approved or accepted at a board meeting.
Thought so too, Bill.
Annually, we have to accept, at a board meeting, I think we vote on accepting a report from the nurses.
Yeah.
Or has that been changed?
That was changed prior to me getting
It was
here.
when,
That was changed.
let's review that. Just go, not tonight, but we can review that and see if it's.
Yeah, we'll take a look into the last time something came to the board, but
Yeah.
when we looked at what was our annual reporting requirements,
Was
when
not-
I arrived here, that was not on the
Not a
list.
required one? Okay. Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, I think we used to have just one registered nurse, and now we have 3. So I think we've moved in the correct direction there with the number of students that we have and the types of issues these days of administering different kinds of medications and so on and so forth. There's need to be additional training. So I'm happy with how we've gone about improving that. I was not aware, or I am not aware, that from time to time we need to, if you look at the end of the third paragraph, the superintendent shall also identify a licensed physician to serve as a medical advisor. Is that something new, or is that something that we've also been doing over the
Yeah.
years?
We've had a licensed provider for many years now, the same provider, Dr. Ustendorf. She is a local pediatrician. I've been in contact with her for the last 4 years, and I know she
And
was
she's
in
even
place.
spoken to the board a couple
Yeah.
of times. I guess I just didn't realize she was our formal advisor.
From time to time, a lot of her work is done. We call and consult with her on policy, on procedure. In the next policy, you'll see some language in and around Narcan. We had a meeting with her to talk about Narcan. Generally, the district medical provider really comes to the attention of the board when you're having conversations around human growth and development. That's when they get heavily involved with committee work and such, and that often is when the connection is made between the board and the medical provider.
Barbara?
Don't we have to have a physician at football games?
No. We're required to have athletic training services at a football game. You don't have to have a physician there.
So I've had an experience with somebody cut their chin open and they went into the locker room and the doctor stitched it up and came back and played. We don't have that service.
I couldn't speak to the individual. That'd be something that we could ask the athletic directors on if we have a physician at all the games.
I
But
thought we had to, for football especially.
no, we have to have athletic training services.
Okay,
And so
okay, and
the
that we
athletic
have.
trainers are there to assess the immediate need. I have not been to a football game in Waukesha, but as a football coach for many years, we always had the fire paramedic was always stationed at the football games that I coached at. So there was always an ambulance there and prepared if somebody got hurt.
Oh, that's good.
I would have to double check if that was the case at Waukesha, but
Okay, thank you.
That speaks to the fact, if you read this, because the first time I went through this, a little bit inaccurately, we have to have emergency nursing services available. We do not have to have an emergency nurse available at all of these events. So it's, and Joe has explained to me that we have people that have been trained with those services, right?
right, and so we've talked before, for instance, with field trips. That's often where it comes. And so somebody who is trained, using diabetic care as an example, somebody who is trained in how to administer the diabetic care to a student or a group of students who are going on a field trip or who are participating in a band concert or a choir concert at night, we need to make sure that we're the ones then that provide that staff there. We can't rely simply on the family to do that. We have an obligation to make sure that's there, and that's the extension of emergency nursing services. We don't have to have the nurse there, we just have to have somebody who's trained there.
First aid, okay.
And this is, Joe.
I move to approve the revisions to policy 5310.01 emergency nursing services.
I'll second.
Seconded by Barbara. Any further questions on 5310.01? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 0, thank you. Okay, this next one also gets a little bit more interesting. This is administration of medication and emergency care. Policy has been revised to incorporate provisions in state law that permits school personnel to administer epinephrine under certain conditions and with appropriate training. In addition, and I believe we added this locally, language about administering Narcan nasal spray has also been added to this policy, and you will find all of that on the back side of, page 1 or number page 2. The entire page almost has been updated for the epinephrine and the Narcan administration. Joe, do you want to elaborate a little bit, particularly, the epinephrine is required,
Epinephrine is,
correct?
it is
If somebody
strongly
needs it.
recommended that you have epinephrine on hand in schools, particular to allergies, food-based allergies that may not be known yet by a student. And then also when you think of the spring and the fall of the year, bee stings. That would be the two areas where the epinephrine pens. We have for a number of years had stock EpiPens in the district. The prescription is written by our medical advisor. We're able to get those epinephrine pens. We keep 4 of them in each of our schools, 2 children's doses, 2 youth doses, whatever the proper term is, and then 2 regular doses of epinephrine on hand as a life-saving measure. And you see in here what the requirements are around epinephrine. As we talked last month at the committee meeting, Narcan, which is the anti-drug of heroin, any opioid base, it's a drug that goes right to the opioid receptors in the brain, and it prevents the opiate from connecting to the brain and putting the person in distress or death. The Narcan steps there, we looked at a number of examples from neighboring school districts. Those examples had been vetted by their attorneys. This language has been vetted by our medical provider. We had about an hour-long meeting with our medical advisor talking about Narcan in schools. If you remember back to last month, it's not so much, cautious as I say this, it could be that somebody intentionally abused an opioid and came to school, intentionally abused heroin and came to school. It's a possibility. But really, this is the kid who accidentally comes in contact with it, from a supply at home, particularly an elementary or early middle school age kid, where you want to make sure that you have that life-saving measure on hand. And so we're in a position where we can put this into policy language. We can get the epinephrine or the Narcan into our schools, and we can have it there as a life-saving measure. The Narcan, I asked specifically, what are the risks if you're not in an opioid? And the doctor said that all it would do would go to your brain and block the opioid receptors. If there's no opioids in your body, it's not doing anything to your body. It's just so. So the risk, the health risk is minimal. The health benefit is substantial to have this in the system.
And just a minute, and I understand from your explanation to me earlier that it's as easy to apply as even easier than epinephrine, right?
Right. I mean, this is a nasal spray. So if you've ever used an allergy spray in your nose or had to use a steroid when you've had a sinus infection, it goes in the nose the same way.
Barbara?
Yes, do we keep stock of Narcan in all of our buildings, or?
We don't have it in there yet. That has to be approved by the board.
Okay.
Through policy. Then we have to have proper training
think
with
so.
the staff at all of our buildings, and then we have to, acquire the Narcan
So that's something that we're going to be doing forthcoming,
if the board approves this in policy.
if we approve this policy.
Policy is approved, then we'll get going on acquiring Narcan and making sure that the training
Okay.
happens. And there's currently a grant out there right now to cover the
I would think
cost
so.
of the drugs.
Yeah, I would think so.
Bill?
Yeah, just a couple of points. One, at the very top, it says the board intends to adopt and maintain a plan for managing students with life-threatening allergies, etc. And I'm wondering if we should, I'm questioning the word intends. I would maybe change that to something stronger like shall adopt and maintain, or will. There's a difference between shall and will. Will means we will do it. Shall means we should do it.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if there's one better than the other. I'm looking to my fellow board members and to Joe on
My
that.
recollection of Shell is it's the stronger of the two. But that's
I guess
You have
that's
to.
from a nun many years ago.
by approving this language, I mean, it's almost the statement in and of itself is
The approval of this.
The approval
just
of this-
puts it into effect.
right. So, the board, it's almost like the board has approved a plan for maintaining students with life-threatening allergies so as to permit each school to obtain a school prescription for epinephrine auto-injectors. And so that would be language that, once approved, and I don't, it's kind of,
This
from
is
an
the
administrative
approval of-
standpoint, I have to propose language to you that gives you the opportunity to approve it. And then you could make that suggestion to say that the board has approved a policy. But if we say intends right now, that puts me in a position where I'm asking you to approve this based
Okay.
off of how we operate.
Okay,
But if I say we have approved it already, then I'm getting,
Yeah.
the cart is out in front of the horse. I'm requiring you to act on something that you would want to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm okay. I'm okay with that verbiage. And then skipping down to the Narcan section, to item number 4, we're suggesting that the Narcan be stored inside the AED kits. And I was just questioning if that's probably convenient, right? Because they're dispersed throughout the schools in key locations. I was a little concerned about kids maybe coming along and just taking it.
And
Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so we did talk about that. The AED kits are alarmed. So if you go open up the AED box, an alarm will go off.
Oh.
And that can act as a deterrent. The other part of it is, if there's a situation where a student or a friend of a student is abusing heroin or an opioid-based drug, and they get their hands on Narcan, and somebody ODs, and that person lives, we talked about that very scenario. That's an acceptable loss in my eyes, knowing the cost of what that Narcan is. I mean, so if it were to be stolen, if the alarm were to go off, I mean, we've got measures to make sure that we can monitor that. The AEDs, if you're just using the Lindholm as an example, it's 15, 20 feet away from Sue Ettinger's office, the superintendent's office. So if that thing goes off, Sue's going to hear the alarm and know that something happened. Those are also in areas that are on camera. So our cameras in our buildings, one of our cameras overlooks the AED.
Really?
Because we recognize that the
Good.
AED is an expensive device. Somebody were to break into that, 1, we have the alarm, 2, we have the cameras. There's a likelihood then that we could find out who took that. Same thing would be in place with the Narcan. But, from an acceptable loss perspective, there was a situation that happened at this very building last school year, where it was an adult in our parking lot had OD'd. And, it was a situation that was a very scary situation. It did make it into the media. But to have that life-saving measure on hand, I think it's a good thing for us.
Yeah. Well, my comfort level goes up with knowing that there's an alarm, and
that's a
that
good
we
idea.
can, we can at least get our hands wrapped around that a little bit in a quick manner, actually. So.
I think just a little side notes related to this. Currently, we have the access to it through the SROs,
Correct.
correct? So if something goes wrong today, because we don't have the Narcan available right now, right?
Right, we don't have Narcan available. And using the SROs as an example, on any given day, the SROs are in 4 schools. We do have one who works at the middle school, but the practicality of it, that person getting there, I mean, they do keep this in the squads, they keep it in the ambulance in Waukesha. For all of our other locations, it would be a 911 call where they would come. But again, you think about the timeliness of it. It's the sooner you can administer it, you increase survival rates and just to have it there and present. And again, I'm not thinking of the person who's abusing drugs per se. I'm thinking about the accidental situations, which when I spoke with my counterparts in other school districts, when they went in for training, there has been a trend across the country where there have been younger and younger accidental overdoses because kids have had access to pills in the home. So that's really where schools are seeing a greater need for it, is in the accidental at the lower grades.
Okay, anything else on this one? This is a big one. Joe, you wanna do it?
Yeah, I move approval of policy number 5330, administration of medication / emergency care as presented.
Seconded by Greg. Any further questions or changes? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Okay. Now we have policy 5421 regarding grading. And this is one, as I've talked to Joe earlier, This is one of those policies that keeps showing up. So Joe, I'm gonna let you kind of give us our last, why the idea or the concept we have here.
Yeah, so if you remember a few years back, we made an effort to try to increase AP test participation. And we had indicated that, that you would only get a weighted grade for the course if you took the AP test. What we found is that it didn't have the desired effect on the AP, the overall AP scores. There were some kids that were signing up to take the test so that they could get the weighted grade, but the effort wasn't being placed on the test. So we made a decision, we've learned from that decision, and we're requesting now that if you take the AP course, you'll get the weighted grade. And you see that language, AP courses will only receive the weighted grade point if the student participates in the AP exam given by the College Board. We're proposing to take that language out. We're also talking, you see the youth and course options. If you remember when we talked about youth and course options, and then we talked about that extended conversation around weighted grades. So say, for instance, you took AP Calculus in Waukesha, and then you wanted to take AP Calc 3 through Carroll or WCTC. In order for you to have earned the weighted grade at the college level, you must have participated in the AP test and earned a 3 or higher on the AP test. And that language then has been added into the weighted grades policy. You see it right on the bottom of the page, and then as it carries over into the back page. So we wanted to make sure that we had that protection around course and youth options. And then you'll see at the end that we took out the other courses that are weighted include youth options and course options. We struck that language because we added it above.
There was some logic behind doing this, and also, in all honesty, some people were spending money that was not necessarily spent.
It's $90 for an AP test. And we wanted to be cognizant of the parent who's paying for the test. There's decision-making, the parent has to decide to fund the test. The student has to decide to put forth the effort on the exam. If the parent funds the test and the student doesn't put forth the effort because of something that we created in policy, we want to be cognizant of the parent's, pocketbook as well.
Is the testing done on a different day?
AP testing, there's a testing window. I believe the window is in early May, if my memory is serving me correct. So for about a 2-week period of time, all of the College Board allows the administration of the AP test. So AP Calc may be given on a Monday, AP Chemistry on a Tuesday, AP Physics on a Wednesday, AP Art on a Thursday. Just
At their
using
home
that as
school.
an example. At their school location, yes.
Okay.
In a separate, quiet location.
Yeah,
We try to create
I
as
would think
optimal
so.
of a scenario as we
Okay.
can. And there are certain rules about who can administer the test. Classroom teacher who's teaching AP History is not able to administer the AP History test. They have a neutral proctor for those exams.
Oh, Joe?
Just a comment. That $90 for the test could be one of the better investments a student can make when compared to actually paying for those credits at one of the colleges that he or she may choose. So might seem like a lot of money at the time, but boy, if you can take a pass on paying for those credits, it's good investment. So I like actually how this is lined up, and you know what? I'm glad that we tried what we tried a couple of years ago, and it didn't work, and we were testing and measuring, and I'm glad that you came back and said, hey, look, this isn't making sense. So, yeah.
Okay. Greg, you want to make a motion? I'll move to 54, what did you say? 5421. Yeah.
I'll second.
Any further questions? All in favor of accepting 5421, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0, Lynn. Next one's a little bit more straightforward. We have, in the past, had 5460 with a list of all the things required for graduation or how you get credits towards graduation. And this one simply is adding, under the physical education waiver and sports activities, boys and girls lacrosse. And Joe, do you want to just tell why it's been added?
Yeah, a few years back, the Department of Public Instruction allowed for a sport to replace a PE class as long as the student was enrolled in another elective type course. So if you were a soccer player who had to choose between physical education and taking AP, whatever it is, or take an elective that would be career-oriented for you, they allowed the student to count that opportunity in soccer as a waiver to the PE requirement. So you'll see on there that we have the sports that had been approved up until our proposed policy change tonight. For the past several years, we've had a growing participation rate in boys and girls lacrosse in Waukesha. And that's got to the point right now where there's a varsity coach, there's an established season, that the competitions are officiated by a licensed official. It is treated as a varsity type sport in Waukesha. So therefore, we're proposing adding that activity, that sport, to this list of waived sports.
Are the games in the fall or the spring?
I believe it is a spring sport.
And that's the only adjustment in this
Yeah.
policy.
So it's, if you looked at it quickly, you almost missed it. It's on the bottom of the second page, right in the list of
I
sports.
did the first time through. What are you changing?
A little harder to read. The print was so small. I don't know if it is on yours.
It's small. Make a motion, Barb?
Yes, I'll move to accept the revisions to policy number 5460, graduation requirements as presented.
I'll second.
Seconded by Greg. Any further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0, Lynn. And policy 8320.01, unauthorized acquisition of staff personal information. And this is privacy protection initiative, I guess you'd say. There were some options available on this one. If you look at the first sentence, first paragraph, we have chosen to maintain the files both electronically and on paper format. And then it goes on further. If it is determined, I guess, that the risk is not serious, you don't have to go through all the paragraph 2 stuff. Any questions on this,
I don't.
Barbara?
Does this refer to information at central office? What about in the school in the school buildings? You know, like, I'm thinking of teacher evaluations that a principal keeps.
So the teacher evaluation system is now an online-based program. So
Really?
the old forms that had been used in the past, they don't exist anymore. There should be no notes kept in a Google platform or anything like that. Everything that the district does around teacher evaluation is through the DPI model, through the My Learning Plan software. It's frontline education. It's all done through contract with the state. So that's where the teacher evaluation piece
And so
would be kept.
you can go back 3 years, 5 years, because it's all online.
We've been using, this is our third year, I believe,
Okay.
where that model that's been the accepted platform.
What about the information that you had before, prior to 3 years
This
ago?
does, well, there's certain records retention rules that we must follow, and that's a long, lengthy document that's put out
Okay.
and maintained by the DPI. But this does talk about any record that is kept about staff. So this would be the record that the principal would keep in their office. This would be the record that we would maintain electronically. This would be the record that is kept in a filing cabinet or in some other system in the school districts. This policy applies to everything that we do.
And basically, they're listed in paragraph 2, right? I mean,
Correct.
Yeah. If you don't know what deoxyribonucleic acid is, that's your DNA.
One more question, please.
Sure.
Cam, the principal, and I've got some information, may I access it without getting authorization from the teacher?
But you'd have to give me an example.
Well, maybe there was an incident that occurred, and the principal made a note, as you mentioned, and keeps in a school file. But if I open up that file at another time to review that situation, do I need to have authorization?
The official employee file is maintained in human resources. So
Okay.
if you were my employee and I was your supervisor,
Yes.
and we had to do something disciplinary, and I had to give you a letter,
Yes.
I would note personnel file, and the official personnel file is
Is here at
maintained by the
central
Human
office.
Resources Office.
Okay.
So that, to get down to that, that would be something that, if you had a right to know the information on the employee, you'd have to go to the HR office and then formally review that file. I'd have to look into what the guideline says in and around that. But again, this policy talks about unauthorized acquisition. So say, for instance, a spreadsheet of employee information was discarded inappropriately in the trash, and it was discovered that it was discarded
Yes.
inappropriately. Then we as a district have certain things that we need to do in order to notify our employees of what happened. And that's what this policy covers there. It's our obligation to notify and protect our employee information.
And there's something else that should be noted. I think you vetted all these with Chris.
All this went through Chris Hedstrom, yes.
Joe?
Who is our DRO?
Sue Ettinger is our records officer.
Okay. And do we get breaches very often where we have to implement this?
I experienced that my 3.5 years
Okay.
in Waukesha. I
Okay,
have not
so
heard one.
so an incident is not driving this. Neola is.
Neola's making this recommendation,
Okay.
correct?
Okay. And I appreciate the third paragraph where there are some instances where we don't have to notify. Was there more than two choices or only those two choices given by Neola?
This was the section here. The choice component to this was in the first paragraph where it says the files will be maintained.
These are not choices, these are just
Yeah, this
examples.
is an
Okay.
addition. The choice came under the first paragraph where it says this file will be maintained, and we X the box in both electronic and paper format. Because
Okay.
we do have some records maintained electronically, for instance, in Skyward, and we have other information that's maintained in paper in our filing cabinets.
Understood. I thought we might have also had a choice given the A and the B in here. I thought there could have been a C and a D and some others, and we just chose
No,
those couple. So,
A-
okay,
A and B is just the two parts.
I got it.
Okay.
Barbara?
This might be a silly question. There's a new principal that's going to take over the school, and he or she may be very interested in knowing as much as possible about about each staff member, besides meeting with them personally. Can that new principal then come down here and look into that file to see if there's anything or not?
That's what they wanted to do.
Yes.
And they had a list of people that they wanted to
Yes.
review. That request would go through Chris Hedstrom for its appropriateness,
Okay,
and then take a look. But again, this policy is not covering a situation where an administrator would be looking at an employee's file. This policy is covering if a spreadsheet of information were discarded inappropriately, or if we noticed that our system was hacked and people had access to something. That's what this covers. It doesn't cover what is the right of an administrator to review a file, right of the Human Resources Office to review a file, the right of the employee to come in and review their file. All of those things, could be part of the day-to-day operations.
and there's probably many other situations.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe?
Yeah, I'd move to accept the revisions to policy 8320.01 unauthorized acquisition of staff personnel information as presented.
I'll second.
Seconded by Greg. Any further questions? All in favor of policy 8320.01 as revised, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that's 4-0. So that was the list of our action items. These will go on February 14th to the full board for a reading. And we don't have any changes to make to those. Further down on your agenda, you see the first reading of January full board meeting. We had 7 policies read to the board without any disagreements or questions or concerns among the full board members. I guess I would ask if anybody here has dreamt anything up in the meantime on withdrawal from school. That was, that policy we basically are following. Schools and government agencies was the wording about law enforcement officers.
I have something
Yes,
there,
please.
sir. Okay. Perhaps, it's on the back page.
Very
There-
back, okay.
Very, under number 2 and under C, the references police officer, and I think we wanted to change that to law enforcement officer. Did you catch it, Lynn?
I'm looking at it right now.
There were 2 instances there. In number 2, the last sentence starts with the word "the police officer" on the back page. And then we go down to
Which
Oh,
number
second to
two?
last sentence.
second, yes,
Under B2.
under C.
Should say law enforcement officer, thank you.
And under letter C,
Mm-hmm.
it says police officer. So, and I think if we,
Law enforcement officer?
yeah, we talked about
Agree.
changing it to law.
Yes.
We will,
The-
okay, then we really should have a vote, this group, to approve that and then bring it to the board and with, as a change here.
As a we just put it in as a standalone.
Yeah, Barbara, would you please
Make a
just
motion.
vote to make those
Okay,
changes?
I move to accept revision to policy number 5540, the schools and governmental agencies, as amended. As
I'll
amended.
second that.
Yeah.
Seconded by Joel. Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
In favor, please say aye.
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 That passes as adjusted there, Lynn. Okay. Thank you, Barb. Oh, I wonder if we got into the same situation on 5771. Maybe we better take a minute just to be sure. Slightly different. I don't think we're dealing with,
This is where we're talking about school resource officers
yeah.
specifically.
That's all that was changed there, right? Oh, we have the breath and alcohol thing. Resource off. Okay. 71, any questions on 5771? Okay, we'll pass on that one then. Fundraising, the adjustment there was requiring superintendent's approval on the fundraising, where we're gonna use logos or pictures, et cetera. And the second option, crowdfunding, which really leads us to a subsequent policy. Questions on 5830? Okay. Pass that one aside. Crowdfunding. A new way, basically, of raising some funds. And again, we here are putting the option under the superintendent to approve this. And that anything equipment-wise will become the property of the school district of Waukesha. Any changes to those? No? Okay, we'll set that one aside, is good. Student fees, fines, and charges, this was dealing basically with the
Collection.
account that a student would have and other expenses that the student is supposed to be paying for, fees. We will not be using volunteers to collect fees, including food service balances.
I have a question on that.
Yes,
I recall that when the hot lunch money wasn't paid for, I mean, this was a while ago, that sometimes the cooks or the people that were in charge of the kitchen would say, but you owe us money. Now, they're not considered volunteers, they're considered employees,
They're
right?
contracted employee, I mean, they're part of this food service
Okay,
contract, so,
that's what I thought.
yes.
All right, trying to make sure.
everybody okay with that one? Good, and system of accounting, quite simply, the board has responsibility to designate institutions to serve as depositories of our funds and designate additional and different institutions. We are already up to date on that. Is there any questions on that one? No. Review 9 through 15, these will be coming back for a second reading at the February meeting with a amendment, so to speak, under 5540 for changing the terms police officer to the law enforcement officer. So we are okay with that? Excellent.
So these last from 9 to 15, we'll have a second reading at the February meeting, right?
At the full board meeting?
Or board meeting?
Yes.
And then when will we vote on it at the following meeting in the
No,
March?
we'll vote on that night. Okay? Great. Under discussion items, anything, recommendation for future committee meetings that anybody wants to raise? Or other things that you've got?
Just foreshadowing a little bit, we've talked about course and youth options for a long time now. The state is changing the language around both of those programs. And you will notice that the course options, which was added maybe, it's going to be 4 or 5 years ago now. Course options is going to be going back to part-time open enrollment, and the rules associated with will go back to that. Course options is, it's got a different name, and I apologize for not having it. So you'll see those policies coming before you in the months ahead as we get that update. We also just,
Is that internally initiated or extra?
it's DPI initiated.
Okay.
DPI worked out some of the bugs, or they identified some of the bugs in the course options, and then how that would apply to youth options. The opportunity is still going to be there. It's just going to have a different name,
okay.
and processes will change a little bit. But it's in its in its core, it's still going to be the same opportunity for kids. The other thing we had. The update from Neola, the second book of Neola updates just arrived last night or this weekend from Neola. So I have another batch of policies that we'll be working through administration with and then bringing to committee. That'll keep us busy over the next several months.
Gee, thanks, Joe.
And then associated with that is some updated information. Lynn and I will provide that to you on the Appleton, the Appleton Supreme Court ruling regarding open meetings.
Right.
They have provided some clarity on what an open meeting is. Lynn and I, along with the cabinet, are looking through our policies that talk about board initiated committees. And so, for instance, we have the policy committee. The policy committee is noticed as an open meeting. It has the open meeting expectations. We're looking through policies to see what other committees come from the board beyond the established
have.
board committees. One example is the committee that would review a textbook complaint or a book materials complaint. That's treated as an open, that's treated as a board-directed committee that follows the open meeting requirements. What we have to do is look through those policies to see, does the board require the administration to convene a committee to do something? If that's the case, we have to make sure that those meetings are noticed appropriately. Or have we put those requirements under the administrative guidelines, which those endpoints are with the superintendent, And if the superintendent requires it, it doesn't have the same open meeting requirement. So is it coming from the governmental body, or is it coming from the superintendent? We'll be doing that work here now over the
So the
next couple of weeks.
superintendent can do it, period, but the board has to have it done in an open
It
meeting.
would have to be, and even if the
Makes
board
sense.
is requesting that a
Yeah,
group of
makes sense.
administrators and teachers get together to do something, that may have the open meeting requirement. If the superintendent requires it, it does not,
Makes sense.
Even if the board is present?
even if the board is present. It depends on how many board members are present. One board member is a representative, but, like looking at our committee, 3 members would make up a quorum at our committee. So are requiring, so by definition, who's making that?
Okay.
And is the board member attending that meeting as a designated representative, or is that board member there because the board member had time to drop in?
Well, an example of that would be at a safety committee meeting where there's one board member there as a,
Safety committee, but even the safety committee is treated with the open meetings
is,
process, so.
but we don't, I can't, in years, I can't remember ever having a need for a closed session at that.
No,
Because we've deleted all the students' names, we don't use those anymore. Joe?
And this is really to clarify special meetings, essentially, that we as a board say we want to have happen, whether or not we're involved or not. So we could make a charge to administration, and no board members are even present. That would require to follow the open records law. Is that correct, Joe?
and that would be if it's governed in policy. So if you were to say to me, Joe, why don't you go back to your team and look at X, Y, and Z, that may or may not have the open meetings requirement. If you have a policy that says the board directs administration to 2 times a year, do whatever, then that would trigger, because it's based in policy, that would trigger the requirement to post that meeting publicly, and then conduct the meeting.
Yeah, there's some,
Can complicate things, can't we? Not we.
it's good to get clarity around that, though.
Oh, it is, I agree.
I think those are very important laws on our books. I'm glad that we do our work in front of the people, because it's for the people. And that level of transparency, I think, is really important. So I'm glad that there's some effort to gain some clarity around
Do all
that.
school districts have policy? They may be different looking and may say different things, but then again, they may say a lot of the same things because by state law.
I could not imagine a school district that didn't have it.
I
I can't
can't
speak for
either.
certain, but I venture to guess that if you're a governmental agency, which a school board is, which a school district is, there has to be policy in place.
And
However expansive or
Yeah,
however
right.
limited, there has to be policy in place.
But whatever
that
it'll
gives
be
shape.
as per Wisconsin statutes.
It would be linked in some areas. Some things go right to the state of Wisconsin, some things go right to the federal government, some things stop right at the school board. It just depends on what the area is being discussed.
You're leaving yourself wide open to suits if you don't have something down.
Have to have some guidance.
Okay,
Okay,
great. Our next committee meeting will be February 20th. And reminder, well, I guess you know you're going tomorrow for the
Yes.
convention. You're probably not able to go. Are you going? Today? Oh, yeah, okay. So, see you all whenever.
meeting adjourned.